everyone.
Thanks, Michael. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Given the challenging times that we're in and the race to develop therapies to address this pandemic that we're in, using AI now is more important than ever. And so I'm really excited to dive into the great panelists that we have today and learn more about how they're driving AI efforts in their leading companies and opportunities that we collectively have to advance each stage of drug discovery and development. And so with that, I want to introduce our panelists here. So Subroto, let's start with you first.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Subroto Mukherjee. I work with GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. I'm the head of innovation for Americas. We are on the consumer healthcare side. We have three different divisions: pharma, vaccines, and consumer. I represent the consumer healthcare side of the house, and we are mostly doing the digital transformation. And obviously, AI is one of the key areas we are trying to introduce and have an AI as a service in the company. We are looking at all the different cognitive services. We are having a bunch of other new emerging technologies we are trying in our consumer healthcare space. Thanks.
Great. Tatiana, let's go over to you next.
Thanks, Sandeep. My name is Tatiana Sorokina. I am a solution director of the data science and AI group at Novartis. We are a part of the digital team that is fairly newly established, and the idea is that we're part of this digital transformation Novartis is going through, and our role at the company is to introduce AI to various different corners of the company and really make sure that data science and machine learning are integrated into the day-to-day business of the company, and that it has the biggest impact on the economical but also the societal part of what Novartis does.
Great, thanks. And Eric, let's jump over to you.
Hello, I'm Eric Maloney. I am the Director of Strategy for Blue Prism's Advisory Partners. Blue Prism is an intelligent automation vendor. Digital workers are able to be programmed to interact with any digital interface, so we can automate work and interact with AI systems and other systems to produce complex workflows that can be designed to work with people to take on a variety of business challenges, IoT, and other aspects of emerging technologies related to pharma research.
Great. Abhijit?
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep. Hi, everyone. I'm Abhijit Chakraverty. I'm one of the managing directors in our Deloitte strategy and analytics practice, focusing on mainly life sciences, pharma industry clients. I have over 14 years of experience advising Fortune 500 clients on business and cost transformations. When I started my journey in consulting around a decade ago, it used to be mostly business transformations using traditional drivers of process improvement, standardization, centralization. But over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, the focus has shifted on the digital transformation, starting with RPA, intelligent automation, machine learning, and now broader AI levels. Over the last couple of years, I also worked with our partner, Blue Prism, on several large-scale automation journeys as well, that we'll definitely talk through some of them later today. Happy to be on the panel.
Great, thanks Abhijit. And I think I'm the last one. So my name is Sandeep Burugupalli. I lead Pfizer's Data Center of Excellence. So my team sits under the Worldwide Research and Development team at Pfizer within the Chief Medical Officer's Medical and Safety team. My team is currently trying to reimagine and actively build novel solutions to help our research and early clinical development teams use real-world data and AI primarily to better understand emerging diseases. And so it's really how can we enable this better data-enabled way of bringing a better understanding of diseases and really kind of helping advance the next generation of Pfizer therapies. I come to Pfizer with a background bringing innovation and transformation across kind of multiple healthcare stakeholders. So, you know, I'm in pharma now, but most recently, I was at the government, at the White House and the NIH. And previously before that, I was launching innovation teams at Mass General Hospital and the Texas Medical Center. So I'm very happy to be here today and with this great group of people doing really exciting, interesting things, and excited to kind of dive into some of the topics at hand. Good, so the first question that we're gonna jump into, very timely given what's going on right now. So, you know, all of us, I think, have easy to say that we've been impacted by COVID in a certain way, both professionally, but also personally, but we'll focus on the professionally aspects for today. So how has COVID impacted your work and increased the focus on AI? I think I'll take this one first, and then I'll kind of hand it off to others across the across the panel here. So for us, I think at Pfizer, you know, I kind of say I used to have a day job. I used to focus on, you know, the strategic goals that we had at the beginning of the year. And I think for us now with COVID, a lot of that not necessarily has dropped, but it's become deprioritized to focus on COVID and our efforts advancing either the vaccine or the antiviral work that we're working on. So really, my group has been coming in to provide almost that foundational understanding of what's going on, and in real time trying to be able to keep up with what are the trends in kind of the outbreak, what's happening in terms of the epidemiology. So how can we get a better understanding of the outcomes, predictors of either mortality or certain severity of conditions or things like that. So for us, it's really been how can we use data now to get ahead of kind of the curve in some ways of understanding what's going on with the disease. And so we're using real world data and trying to use specifically in terms of AI, natural language processing, to be able to understand you know, all the emerging literature that's coming out. There's a lot of great literature right now that hasn't been peer reviewed, for example. Can we extract information from many of the emerging literature today? Many of you might be familiar with the COVID-19 data set that was released by the White House that consolidates about 50,000 articles and literature around COVID and the corona family of viruses. And we're trying to use machine learning now to synthesize some of that information. I'll hand it off to the others on the panel to kind of explain how COVID may have impacted their work as well. Anyone can feel free to jump in.
I can maybe build on a little bit on your point, Sandeep, about the using the natural language processing. So I think one of the questions that our team got at the beginning of the pandemic was, what can we learn from the patients around the world about how pandemic is affecting their lives? Because the way, you know, because if we understand how the pandemic affects their lives, then we understand how it affects the lives of the physicians who are treating them, and therefore how it affects our well-being as a pharmaceutical industry. And so it's very, you know, we've kind of started looking at what people are talking about on social media, and we currently have a capability to go into various different social media outlets and mine information about what kind of insights and sentiments patients, consumers, all of us are sharing about COVID-19 and where it's happening, right? And then overlay that information with the information about where the major healthcare clusters are located. And then by looking at that overlap, we could sort of understand our opportunities, especially in the commercial, on the commercial front, and understand how much our production and sales would be affected in various different parts of the US and around the world, and in what sequence, so that we can better prepared to educate and train our field force to, you know, start moving from the face-to-face to the virtual, you know, detailing and overall support of the doctors about how COVID-19 is impacting their lives. So we definitely I saw NLP as a really good way of kind of tracking that information, like you said, in real time, and then overlaying it with other different data sources for actionable recommendations.
That's great, and it's really interesting to see Novartis doing that kind of work. At GSK Subroto, are you seeing similar things?
Yeah, so exactly. So as you mentioned, right, so when this COVID started happening, we had to deprioritize certain activities and prioritize based on our key initiatives. I think based on what we have seen is, as you were mentioning, Tatiana, is like we had to kind of pivot to a couple of two key initiatives in the consumer healthcare space, and I know vaccines is also doing the similar one with everybody is kind of working towards a quick vaccine solution. So I'm going to focus on the consumer healthcare side. What we are right now focusing on is we have a lot of products which is very in demand. So people are having a pantry load. So what we are seeing is a spike in our all our products being happening. We are out of inventory and many retailers. So what we are trying to do is kind of do a predictive modeling in a better way so we understand for this kind of seasonal impacts to our current model. So our supply chain and our stocking can be easily defined. So we are working towards a predictive model which kind of takes data from different sources. Social is one of them, as you had mentioned. So we are trying to build that, but it's very difficult because of the sudden spikes, which is once in a lifetime. We are seeing a lot of anomalies there. So we are still figuring out what's the best way to which best model can fit in. So it can help back to our business from analytics perspective to figure it out in the future. So those are the key things. And obviously vaccine is being very deeply focused on that. We have some joint ventures already planned out with to get a better vaccine out. As GSK has an adjuvant technology which is being quite popular, and they're giving it out to a few other countries to kind of help it out to help the mankind on this one specific one.
Good. I think we're also working on the predictive modeling aspects as well for both measuring outcomes and trying to predict, for example, waves of this outbreak, right? If you're setting up a clinical trial in July or August or somewhere around that time period, how do you predict that next wave of where the outbreak is going to be so that you can optimize the clinical trial selection in some way? I'm curious from everyone's perspective here. For us, the data has become difficult to get at times because it's rapidly progressing and it's changing day by day. And so I'm curious from your perspective, when you're trying to develop these models, how have you gotten the data around specifically real-time COVID level, patient level data?
So I can kind of jump in on that. As I said in the introduction, what we do at Blue Prism is we can create digital workers. So anything that has a digital interface. If there are sensors, I think people might be aware of, you can get real-time temperature information from 1 million people in North America. That's one aspect. If you have home care that's affiliated with a health system, you can start using information from that, the nursing services and the rest. So you can get new channels of information that digital workers can process and format for ingest into AI services. So if you identified new threads that you want to explore and see if there are corollaries, digital workers are a really nice way of aligning that raw data, those streams, into a system. Just as importantly, though, on the outbound, if you gain an insight or want to test an insight from an AI service, you need to take action on those tests. You need to have something to demonstrate. Again, we see people using digital workers for that to allow for better ideas around tracing. We're starting to have that work done with health agencies across North America. And I think you're just going to see this interplay between the AI services that you're creating and how they're going to perceive the world on ingest and exert some action on the outbound side. And that's where the interplay happens with digital workers.
Just to add one weird, the two different data sources we're also looking at right now is the WHO and CDC. There's a lot of data that's being out there, country specific by WHO. So we are investigating that and see how really useful that. But I guess another thing he mentioned, I think you mentioned, Eric, is all the different care homes, the rates going on is a pretty interesting fact, which it should be I think looked at from every perspective, because that gives you kind of early indicators. I think if you look at the epicenter that happened in Seattle, It has all the healthcare, the care center was getting affected first. That gives you kind of a little bit of indicator of the area and how that's kind of going on in that direction.
Right, and actually just as a corollary, the highest percentage of retirement home residents of any state in the United States is New York, and most of them are downstate. So there's a clear corollary there. So yeah, it's one avenue to discover. So it's kind of an extension of your AI model. And I think all three of you touch it. What's going to be your ingest, and what's the most efficient way of getting that data? And that's the kind of work that we want to collaborate on.
That's fantastic. So in terms of, your companies, both Eric and Abhijit, they're supporting the pharma companies that you see here, for example. Tell us a little bit about, sorry, before we jump into the next question, I just wanted to ask one more COVID question here. Tell us about some of the work that you're doing to help enable our companies.
Sure. So overall, I think Deloitte-wide, we came up with a point of view on looking at various factors of COVID in terms of scenario modeling that I think you were talking about. What's the overall severity of the pandemic? What are the scenarios of low, medium, high? What are the level of collaboration within and between countries will be in the near term, 18 to 24 months, as well as 3 to 5 years? What will be the healthcare system response to the crisis, the economy, the kind of some of the consequences of the economy and various scenarios, and the level of social cohesion in response to the crisis. So we looked at like these 4 or 5 various fundamental uncertainties and essentially built few scenarios around what the kind of leaders should look at in terms of their response to COVID, from a tactical strategy of next 18 to 24 months, how you can kind of model some scenarios of being resilient, as well as longer term, some of the kind of criteria around where, like I think all of you look at the global firms and how everyone can kind of come together and respond to some of the scenarios. So we worked with essentially another partner of our Salesforce in coming up with all these various kind of scenarios in there. So some kind of example that clients are looking at out there is how they look at their smart manufacturing, they look at their supply chains, they look at their working capitals. So we are helping clients fine tune and kind of help draft their response based on some of these scenarios that we have modeled accordingly.
If I can actually add to something that Abhijit was talking about, prior to COVID-19, one area of joint work between Deloitte and Blue Prism was on cyber ethics in pharma. And I think you're going to see that coming back into play, and all of you are going to have concerns around disclosure, privacy. I mentioned tracking earlier. There are going to be some controls. And you're going to want to make sure that those are always in play. You're going to want to have an abstraction between your data and people. There might be an automation layer or something else, but that is another consideration that you should think about. And Deloitte has already kind of had a framework developed for something like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's jump into the next question here. If you guys can change a slide for us. There we go. So from preclinical studies to drug discovery to manufacturing to commercial, where is AI making the biggest impact? Where are you guys seeing the most potential for impact as well? So Tatiana, I'll start with you here.
So it's interesting, and thanks Sandeep for this question. It's interesting to see how different divisions within such a large organizations such as Novartis, they adopt AI, and at what point in that journey they are. So I think our team is, so we're part of the digital office, as I mentioned before, and I have this unique opportunity to working with divisions from pretty much across the company. And so what I realized, especially when we're hit by the COVID-19, what I realized was how unprepared the whole industry is with respect to finding the right treatment for a disease that just appeared. And on top of that, how unprepared we are to quickly finding solutions and treatments for the diseases that have been around for decades, and we know they exist, we can diagnose them, but how come we haven't found treatments for many of them yet? And so I think part of the reason goes to, or could be attributed to how long it takes for the drug to go from a molecule and discovering that molecule and to going all the way to clinical trials and through the R&D process all the way to the approval and the commercial use and the launch. And how expensive it is. And over time, the time to get the treatment to market hasn't decreased, it's actually increased, and the cost has increased drastically. And the question is, well, what are the areas of that development journey that could really be affected by AI in a positive way? And so I think we're having multiple different initiatives in different parts of the organization. So starting from research and development, where you're really looking for, looking at the studies and the discovery process, and potentially, in addition to just using your own data and using your own processes that you have in place, you want to apply maybe some analysis from the real world data that's out there already that you can look retroactively and just glean some insights from. So it helps because oftentimes with you don't necessarily, when you run controlled experiments, you don't, in the drug discovery or in the drug development phase, oftentimes you're looking to confirm or disprove a certain hypothesis. You're not looking for many different things that are out there, and that's what the experiment is for. Now, if you look at the real world evidence and you use real world data, you're kind of like letting a lot of it is exploratory, so you're letting a lot of insights just kind of emerge before your eyes. And how do you structurally, how do you then use those insights and turn them into hypotheses to maybe streamline your clinical trials, to streamline your hypothesis, and therefore kind of cut on that time to market? So that would be one use case. There is the very interesting work is going on in the manufacturing side, right? So as the drugs and the products become more complex in terms of manufacturing, can you automate some of your processes or manufacturing processes that are in place to improve the yield of the product, for example, right? And yield is if you can improve yield just a few percent points, the impact on the business is huge, right? And so the idea is to kind of look into those areas of the business and identify those opportunities to then see if we can improve the process even and have an impact of even a 0.1%, 2%, what kind of impact it's going to have on patients and on their well-being. And then finally, the commercial. So there's a lot of commercial use cases, of course. So I've mentioned NLP before, but then you have all this plethora of data from the digital marketing, how you market to physicians, how you market to patients. And because all this is digital, in addition to the field force activities that we've been doing in the field, the question is, well, now we have all this data that we've collected on many different products. And the question is, well, can we utilize that data to, instead of just marketing to doctors and really selling the product to them, can we actually start a conversation with the doctor and personalize that conversation to the extent that the doctor doesn't feel that he or she is being bombarded by the information, but rather having an intelligent conversation with a company and being really a partner to that company as opposed to just an object or the target for the advertising.
What I really find fascinating about what you said is, and I kind of echo the sentiment here, is that there are a lot of use cases across the organization, and they all vary dependent on whether it's R&D or commercial or any of the spectrum in between. And so I think it's really interesting when you say AI and pharma, you know, there's not like a clear cut use cases, but it's really about the technology enabling the use cases in a certain way. So really appreciated kind of a lot of the insights that you provided. In terms, the next question here, oops, sorry, give me a second. In terms of the next question here, are pharma companies sorry, can we go to the next question here? Oh, there we go. Are pharma companies largely in the proof of concept phase, or are they already scaling their AI initiatives? And so I'll hand it off to Eric to answer this one.
So they are all over the spectrum. Depends. I think the previous question leads well into this one. I mean, what Tatiana was focusing her answer, they're all valid areas of concern and investment. I just want to start with one kind of thing I'm very concerned about, and that is process discovery. You mentioned supply chain. We're at a point now where we're still seeing the first wave of the pandemic. This kind of relates even to COVID-19, of course, but when you start looking at how farmers are set up, they have immensely complex supply chains. So even getting outside of the other routines for clinical trials and all the other complexities of your industries, the industry that you're in, you really have to understand that before you can make things, just like AI, before you can improve things, you have to get the data set, you have to get the current state. And I think the process mining is something that maybe most have not looked at. So coming back to the question, those who have an understanding of their current processes are more likely to improve them and optimize them. Those who understand the meta processes and document them can go down into the sub processes. But we are at a point where surprisingly, most of that is tribal knowledge, it's anecdotal knowledge, it's paper-driven knowledge about how these things are done in your large corporations. And I'm very concerned that AI isn't the only concern of focus to create new knowledge. You really have to make sure you're getting these data points. So you won't have the best plans for distribution, yet not have a supply of key compounds to put into the solutions. You won't have the access to the downstream physicians and care services that you want them to feed into without the supply chain. So the focus is, a few have really taken that to heart. And I think that is an area that I think Abhijit can also talk to, that type of investments paying off. The other part I alluded to earlier, I have some examples, probably not as good as Abhijit's because he lives this day in, day out, but when you get into the data outcome planning, and we're all implicitly saying outcome planning, but we're really not, we're looking at all the things we could take in and see where it leads us. We're going from classical AI, looking for patterns, we're gonna really wanna build AI models to lead us to certain outcomes. I mean, I'm not gonna get out of my depth about talking about what you could do in pharmaceutical research. I would not qualify to do that, but it's gonna be quite amazing, just to Tatiana's last point, to go from simple correct diagnosis. I mean, if you go through most of the media, all of it's been really, how do we track? How do we have successful tests? How do we drive up the quality of the tests? And then the second one is the vaccines, and then there's a traditional vaccine. We're now going to be looking at the type of investment to building a class of solution, right, for a spectrum of effects. And it's absolutely amazing what you're all doing in the outcome. But that end-to-end solution, the leaders are those who are really doing that end-to-end process planning and putting AI selectively into the different parts of supply chain and delivery. And I don't know if you're nodding a lot, but Abhijit, maybe you can bring that back to something more specific to these.
No, I think that makes sense. I agree with you. I think if we look at it, the adoption levels vary across various functions. So you have some of these technologies, which we call it, they are here now. So things like intelligent automations, predictive analytics, some of initial machine learning, they are kind of here now. And the use cases which we have seen is adverse events reporting, like the regulatory filing. You have dossiers that you have to file, a lot of data in different formats. For adverse event filing is something Sanofi and Pfizer has looked at as well. That's essentially a lot of kind of data that is out there in different formats, and you use a combination of NLP and your OCR and bring it together through RPA. We have seen a lot of that kind of being adopted by the various clients. Another aspect I know we didn't talk much about is back office functions. That also helps in reducing essentially the cost of the drug ultimately. We have seen a lot of maturity in those functions like finance, their predictive analytics to come up with their forecasting, the audit process, how they look at their audits using some database modeling on predicting where to look for internal audits and external audits. For HR in the recruitment process. So I would just not kind of completely put that off. So there's a lot of use cases on some of these enabling functions as well. And the spectrums is large scale intelligent automations where Blue Prism has a lot of play, and we have kind of worked with them in several of those, and also coming to that other spectrum of AI and machine learning as well.
Yeah, just not to dominate just get back to two things that Abhijit just brought up, which are very interesting. And one is related to what Subroto said earlier on about the discovery. If you look at, it's not just NLP, it's OCR and ICR, the ability of taking optical character recognition and then gleaning intelligence from what the image has in it. So you take a photograph of a document, medical report, and it can glean out of it a lot of information. So you can now ingest a tremendous amount of field information from a hospital or the care service center. And now it'll play into your models. That's amazing. But the other thing that Abhijit said about the back office is interesting. Not only does it drive down your cost, but you're all researchers, you're all involved in analytics. Imagine if you could take 20, 30, 35% of your day and automate those things away. So you can go back to pure research and focusing on discovery and relegate that other stuff to an automation process. And that's the kind of thing that's going to transform. That is our definition of digital transformation. I kind of did in my introduction. How do you co-work with a digital worker so you can do the things that you do best and that you have the highest value for? And I think that's the thing about optimizing a business. And that's why it's a good question. There's so many aspects to running a large pharma. Research is the key, but it's surrounded by all these other necessary components end to end.
So one thing I want to add to the actual question is where the pharma industry is in this current phase. I would say nobody's in the startup right now. I would say somewhere trending towards high up in the chain. Everybody is setting up the whole different environments, data engineering skills. We have data scientists being hired. Now going after the right aspects of it is what I guess everybody, I don't know other pharma, Novartis and Pfizer, but we are actually not, we are kind of really ramping up our whole data science practice and AI areas. So that's a key aspect we have been kind of pushing into all the different lines of businesses, and because seeing a tremendous use and impact on that. So just to add that point. I think there's one of the questions in the chat window, if you can answer that. I think there's a question about if the pharma companies are collaborating. Just to give you a quick one, like GSK has collaborated with Sanofi on the vaccines development. There's a big announcement. So there's a lot of co-participation is happening with the pharma industries, within the pharma industries for current, the current situation of COVID happening.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that collaboration point as well. So we at Pfizer have been working with a privately led consortium called the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition. It's made up of about 57 healthcare providers, all the big tech companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and then we've got some small pharma companies and larger pharma companies like us participating in it as well. And so we're actively working with collaborators such as Google Cloud and a couple of others to be able to get access to real-time data and insights around COVID specifically. To your point, Subroto, about the kind of maturity of kind of where we're at. One of the areas that I think all of us have kind of gone beyond this whole proof of concept phase where that's the only thing, and then it usually dies at the end of the proof of concept and it ends up going nowhere. One of the things that we've been able to actually work with Deloitte on, coincidentally, and Abhijit's team, is trying to put a better infrastructure in place where it's not just you're only focusing on the technology aspects, but you're also focusing on the other aspects of implementation, which also include people and processes. And so for us, we've been working with our procurement teams, our legal teams, which you don't typically think about when you implement a technology solution like that, but we've really focused on how do you get data sharing to not be an arduous process where it takes you 6 months to get a data sharing agreement done, right? How do you, we had this thing called what we're informally calling a sign or walk agreement, where it's a couple of pages, you sign that document and you're immediately working with us after that document is done. So things like that, you know, we've started thinking about implementation now, and how do you kind of go to that next stage beyond just proof of concept. The proof of concept is really just more to bring that company in and make sure it's a right fit, but you really should be focusing on a longer term vision, and that's what we've been kind of focusing on. How do we, after the proof of concept, before we even jump into a proof of concept, we kind of focus on what we want to do after that proof of concept and make sure those pieces are in place before we jump into it. So if we can jump on to the next question here. So this is an interesting one. I think a lot of us are probably dealing with a lot of this structurally within our organizations. Are AI ML teams centralized as centers of excellence, or are they embedded in business divisions? And what has been your experience here? So I'll start with Subroto, and then I'll go to Tatiana.
Yeah, so we don't have any center of excellences yet on the AI and ML. What we have been doing is every divisions is kind of, especially for us, is like we have two different divisions I mentioned, is consumer, pharma, and health and vaccine. So we have our own individual set of streams of data science and data engineering practice being embedded within our organization. And we are, like, for example, the tech is leading the data engineering, and we have a business team, a data officer team doing the data science practice of it. We are scaling up in that manner. And the same thing, I was talking to my vaccines counterpart yesterday. So we are, there is a similar kind of data science team being set up there, but we are collaborating to some extent between the different teams. So for example, we are collaborating in terms of the platforms we are using or the technologies we are using. If they are, the teams has found out some good models which they can think can be used. So we are sharing to some extent to that level, but I think it's not still a one centralized center of excellence being yet practiced in our side yet.
It's interesting. It's an interesting question, so for example, at Novartis, we have both, right? So we have both center of excellences and embedded teams. I personally feel that the model of a hub and spoke type model, right, where you have the hub where a center of excellence, if you will, the team that really holds the keys to knowledge and the most cutting edge technologies that are out there, and has partnerships with the companies that have that expertise in AI and ML. And then they have a very tight collaboration and partnerships with data science teams that are embedded into their organization. I think this is really a key to a healthy way of integrating AI into the company, right? Because one thing that I've noticed personally is I used to actually be on the data science before this role. I used to be in the data science in one of the business divisions on the commercial side. And then I went into the center of excellence or more of a hub type role. And I've seen both sides. And I think what's the reason why hub is always very important to have is because it signifies the importance of data science within the organization, right? So it's one thing when you're a data scientist within finance, you're still in finance. If you're a data scientist in sales, you're still in sales. But if you're making a statement that, our CEO, for example, made a statement that he wants to make Novartis a leading medicine and data science company. When you're making statements like that, you really want to make sure that you have a force behind you that focuses on data science and establishing the data science practice. And that includes many things. It's not just the data science practice. It's hiring talent. It's building the right partnerships with tech companies. It's establishing the footprint within the industry and having other companies kind of follow the way, and you're leading the way as in becoming a technology and truly data and digital organization. So, but at the same time, you as a hub, you can never understand the business well enough because you're not embedded in it, and it's just impossible. And so therefore, having that partnership with data scientists within the divisions and having that really tight relationship with them, bringing your expertise, but then having them act as subject matter experts really makes up for that really good chemistry that I've personally observed.
Yeah. Abhijit, I'm really interested in your perspective, seeing multiple companies and how they're structured and working with them. What have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah, I think similar to what Subroto said, a lot of the companies that start their journey in the proof of concept stage, they are starting within the business and they are experimenting, they are kind of looking into use cases. But when companies start scaling up, the model that Tatiana said is essentially more established, where you have a hub or an enterprise-wide AI COE that essentially, I know Sandeep at Pfizer, you have one as well, and a lot of other clients have that kind of an enterprise-wide COE, which essentially what that helps is bringing a process or a rigor to it so that any business function who essentially establishes and starts the journey doesn't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of what all support you need from your digital organization, from your talent strategy, and from your HR organization, from your legal compliance. You don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel through the process side of it. But I think stepping back, AI is never a fully technology project. Like, I think to Tatiana's point, that's the key point, which I think she was raising, is it's a joint collaboration between business and IT. And the hub or the COEs essentially help kind of document that and kind of establish a process around it, where the initial set of discovery, the process assessment, all of that is essentially led by business. Once that is all kind of done in collaboration with digital, you essentially come up with the use cases. Then the execution side of it, you then have the entire digital organization, your IT, compliance, legal, even sometimes your external auditors come in, because you want to make sure the process kind of adheres to the compliance and regulatory requirements. So all of that, I would say, we've seen companies who are trying to scale up have that figured it out pretty early in the game. So they essentially have this repeatable structure that essentially helps scaling up. So I would say that's kind of what we have seen. It's both ends of the spectrum, where it starts and then a COE helps in scaling up.
If I can add to that, I've seen a trend, and that is, to Tatiana's point, as AI is becoming more mainstream in the processes and in the strategic planning of the pharmas, you're seeing that those COEs are getting larger or merged with other areas, innovation spaces. Future technologies like blockchain. I mentioned IoT earlier, because now they're related. There's adjacencies and automation like ours. They're coming into a larger and larger COE. So it's the line of business needs. You might still have a hub and spoke. You have that central group though, because that innovation has to be aligned. You want the maximum reuse, because you may come up with a phenomenal algorithm for a solution that you didn't realize the other applications for. The businesses will pull that down into those local hubs. So you want that feeder, that you want those challenges from the different businesses. You want the normalization and the compliance and the reporting from the center going out. But I see the trend that the COE is getting actually larger. It's getting more of a mandate to be involved with technology innovations and business innovations. It's really amazing, and it's accelerating. I can't think of too many organizations where the data scientist is a freestanding office anymore, let alone the larger AI ML services. They're really becoming much more integrated to the business functions.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a next question. Michael, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Sandeep. So we are coming up on the end. And so I think instead of going through the rest of the questions, which we don't really have time for, I just want to kind of give everyone one opportunity to give us one kind of final thought. And I'll frame it for you. So now 2020, there is this thing called COVID, but this question isn't explicitly about that. And 10 years ago, nobody was thinking about AI in pharma. 20 years ago, I guess maybe only in the basic R&D phase, but for the most part, it's a new thing in the last 5 years. Everyone's like AI in pharma, center of excellence, data scientist, models in production. And, you all are all in the midst of that journey in your respective roles. And so pretend you're talking to someone now who is brand new to the game in their company, in their pharma company, when it comes to approaching AI. What would you tell them? Like, what do you wish, you of 5 years ago were thinking about when it comes to AI within pharma? Sandeep, why don't you start since you're the moderator, and then we'll go around.
Sure. So I think for me, we touched upon this a little bit earlier, but for me, I think it's, the technology will get there eventually, right? We're still kind of early in some of the technologies, the NLP technologies that we're using, some of the cool things that we're developing with the data. That'll get there over time. I think for us, if we really want to truly implement it, we've got to grow as an organization to be able to take on that capacity. And I know, Michael, when we spoke a couple of months ago, I mentioned this as a thought, but we're really at the stage where the United States was in post World War II, when we wanted to increase the ability for commerce across the United States. You can't really do that unless you build the interstate highway and all of the associated infrastructure that comes with that. For us in pharma, I think for us to get to where we want to be eventually, everyone goes to that end state and everyone wants to get to there immediately. But I think we've got to do the necessary steps along the way to make sure that the people, the processes, the technology is all there to kind of help us get to that point.
I agree. It's a team effort. Eric, go.
Well, actually, building up on Sandeep said, I like the transition about the post-World War II. So you're talking about Industrial Revolution 2.0. Now we're getting to 4.0. We've actually gone through 2 iterations since then. And the half-life is getting shorter. We're about to probably go into Industrial Revolution 5.0, which is going to be a whole new concept driven by COVID. Always think global, always act local. This whole idea of atomizing supply chains, creating local work, but having digital twins and AI services collecting and representing groups for distance collaboration. There's going to be just this whole new way of work that pharmaceuticals are going to be at the lead of, because as everyone on this panel said, you have to think globally. You have a global marketplace. You have a global demand. You have a global responsibility. There are so many things that go through the pharmas that I think that you're going to be part of the next generation of technology solutions, driving the next set of infrastructure based on 5G that are going to allow for some of this real-time work. But it's going to be done much more atomically. A lot less people on planes, a lot more people online, doing a lot more interesting work.
I dig it. You heard it here first, folks. Industry 5.0. Subroto, you're up.
So I think definitely AI is going fast. I think the key one I want to mention to everyone who's new to the company is get your basics right. Basically the data part of it right is a very key element for any AI experiments to run successfully. So that's at the stage we are trying to make sure we have a very centralized, organized data sets, which is a key element we were missing initially. So I would say the very key word everybody should keep in mind to first get your data act straight. I would call it data, and data. So we have to make sure that is being really organized and set up so we can do really a lot of experiments to get the right value set from there.
I agree. It all starts with the data. Abhijit?
Yeah, I think echo everyone else. I just want to kind of provide a statistics that in 2019, last year, when we did a survey, 3/4 of the business said that adoption of AI remains a challenge. And 95% of said that the challenge is mainly around culture, organizational, and process. And only 5% cited technology as a problem. And it echoes kind of everyone else what they said is you have to essentially look at your process, your organization, and how you kind of have that data and the support system. The technology comes after and later, as everyone said.
Yeah, I totally dig. Most of the tech is some version of off the shelf anyway. I mean, a lot of the original, ML AI research isn't happening in these domains anyway. All right. And best for last, Tatiana, 5 years ago, what would you tell yourself?
I would say keep your end game in mind and really focus on it. A lot of, when I feel like when the company started on the AI journey, it was a lot about tech and data and that really cool shiny thing and that vendor that everyone's talking about. We have to work with them, and it was more about methods than it was about the goal and the business impact. I feel like if you really know where you can make impact and where it matters, and you know that automation or is the key to get you there, and you can quantify it, then even a small improvement can give you a really, really large leverage. And you can use that to then progress and make a case for the top management that you really need to scale up on AI, rather than just, doing all these, a bunch of really cool projects, saying you're doing AI, but that not really knowing what it's really going to help you do, but spending a lot of time and money on it.
I dig. Don't do tech for tech's sake. Do it to change the business. I'm with you. All right, everyone. This was awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around with us. Thank you, Sandeep, for moderating, and all the panelists for panelisting. You did a great job. I will end with this final slide, which is just a goodbye and asking for, we have a brief survey that will pop up on your screen. And yeah, thank you so much. I wish you a healthy and safe rest of this pandemic. And I hope everyone crushes it with your own AI journey.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
be well. Cheers.
Take care.